Evening. My name is Diana Femia. I'm the president of the Greater Washington, D.C. Region of NOIAW with members in Maryland and Virginia. I'd like to welcome you tonight to our Buon Natale, unexpected stories about beloved holiday traditions. We're going to discuss some surprising stories behind some of our most cherished holiday traditions, from St. Nicholas, Babbo Natale, and the nativity to candy canes and Christmas stockings. We'll explore how both pagan and Christian rituals magically coalesced into the holiday we celebrate today, as well as a few less familiar kind of customs, such as the Feast of the Epiphany and wearing red underwear. That I have to hear about. Our speaker tonight is Carla Gambescia. Carla has written about and toured every region of Italy on foot and by bicycle. That's something I wouldn't try. She conceived and co-led the Giro del Gelato bike tour, which won Outstanding Magazine's Best Trip in Western Europe. And for a decade, she also owned and operated a restaurant in Mount Cisco, New York, called Via Vanti. Carla's book, La Dolce Vita University, an unconventional guide to Italian culture from A to Z, was awarded the Silver Prize for Best Travel Book of the Year by the North American Travel Journalists Association in 2019. This second edition that she has coming out is greatly expanded with some more fascinating new material, and probably will be a must-read after we hear about tonight's presentation. Our moderator this evening is Leslie Giotti. Leslie is a member of NOIAW for the last 5 or 6 years, and she's on our council. She's president and CEO of Italian Folk Art Federation of America since 2014. Her Italian heritage is from Naples and from Calabria, especially a province called Catanzaro, which is where some of my relatives come from too. So Leslie, I turn this over to you.
Thanks, Diana. We are very excited to have you with us this evening. This is going to be a really fun, really informative lecture that we have from Carla. We will do a Q&A portion, so I ask that you hold your questions to the end and enter them into the chat box that you'll see up at the top right-hand corner of your screen. And I will note your questions and then ask them accordingly. But we really do welcome questions, and I think you definitely will. There's a lot of great information in tonight's lecture. And I think from here, Carla, if you want to go ahead and get started and take us on our fantastic Italian Christmas journey.
Okay, so yeah, so that's just my little commercial. So this is my book. If you're familiar with it, I've added 125 pages, and a lot of the material that I'm covering in this presentation is in the new expanded edition. So anyway, so 'tis the season of nutcrackers, candy canes, and sugar plums. And I'm gonna kick off my Buon Natale talk by addressing the central figure who represents the spirit of Christmas. Now, you all might be expecting me to say the baby Jesus, who I will get to in due course, but instead, I'm going to begin with Santa Claus. Now, any kid will tell you Santa hails from the North Pole. However, Santa's historical journey is far longer and with more twists and turns than his annual one-night circumnavigation of the globe. The progenitor of today's modern Santa was born in the Eastern Mediterranean at the time of the Roman Empire. And his legend evolved across Northern Europe and finally assuming his now familiar man in red form on the shores of the New World. So, who is this ancestor of Santa? And how did he evolve to be such a jolly good fellow? And importantly, the bringer of Christmas presents. So he's known by Santa Claus, Sinterklaas, or just Santa, is actually a variation of Saint Nicholas of Bari, and Bari as in Puglia. However, old Saint Nick is not Italiano, he's a Greek, and he's from ancient Myra, now in modern day Turkey, where he was a Christian bishop. His feast day is December 6th, the day he was supposed to have died in 343 AD. So why is he Nicholas of Bari if he's really like from Greece or Turkey? Well, in 1087, the Barese mounted an expedition to find, or more accurately, acquire the mortal remains of the saint. Now, the technical term is furta sacra, which means holy theft, the taking or stealing of relics, a fairly common practice back in the day. Relics were thought to be very powerful and to confer certain divine protections on their locations and also conferring prestige. Now, the Venetians were very keen on acquiring his relics too, but the Barese got there first and brought him back to Bari, where his bones remain till today in his namesake cathedral. So now, how do you get Saint Nicholas now of Bari becomes the central character in our celebration of Christmas? Well, it's all about his extraordinary acts of generosity and the very spirit that motivates giving to others. Now, there are lots of legends and miracles associated with Saint Nicholas, but one of the most popular legends and stories was one concerning a very poor family, 3 daughters and a widowed father. And this legend is quite unique, and it's an unusual story because back then the stories of saints were mostly about, gory martyrdoms, flayings, roastings, beheadings, and the like, or alternatively, saints going out into the wilderness, fasting, meditating, not very festive, okay? But this story about Saint Nicholas was a different sort of story and one that really captured the popular imagination. So the story goes something like this. We have this poor, despondent father. He has no choice but to sell each of his beloved daughters into prostitution. But each time one daughter came of age, gold miraculously appeared, and enough gold for each daughter to find a respectable husband, kind of like a Cinderella story times 3. Now, the anonymous donor, of course, was Nicholas, but this is only revealed later on. So almost always in Christian imagery, in prayer cards, in art, St. Nicholas is holding a staff, which is a bishop's crozier, and he's wearing a mitre, which is a triangular hat. And he also holds these 3 gold balls, which are his symbols. And the 3 gold balls represent the story of the 3 daughters. Now, the logistics of how he actually got the gold to them, what form the gold took. Was it balls? Was it bricks? Was it coins? It's all a matter of some debate. But when you see it depicted in art, you'll sometimes see Nicholas tossing balls or bags or coins through a window, and sometimes even down a chimney. So you get to see where this is heading. And in the down the chimney version of the story, the girls have been drying out their stockings, and the gold remarkably ended up in their stockings. So hence the origin and tradition of hanging stockings by the chimney with care in hopes that St. Nicholas, would soon be there. But of course, the big idea here is the concept of generosity and goodwill towards others, even those you don't know. Now, during the Middle Ages, St. Nicholas's feast day, December 6th, began to be celebrated, and to commemorate his generosity, small gifts were given, really an early version of what we would call today, our Christmas, and these gifts were given to children. So why is St. Nicholas now associated with December 25th? And how did he get moved from his feast day on the 6th to the 25th? Well, this brings us to this gentleman, Martin Luther, and the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century. Now, Martin Luther, he was a kind of a killjoy, and he sought to eliminate what he considered to be the church's distracting obsession with saints and their worship, and he decided to transfer the tradition of giving gifts from St. Nicholas's feast day on the 6th to Christmas Day on the 25th to keep the focus on the baby Jesus. But this whole gift giving thing, he didn't like that very much either. But he didn't that would have been a bridge too far to eliminate the gifts thing, because people really like that. So now we have the baby Jesus, who's the bringer of hope and joy and gifts. But even little children know and understand that a baby couldn't possibly carry or deliver all those presents. So the baby Jesus needed a helper. And this is how St. Nicholas ends up becoming better known by the German name Santa Claus, rather than his Italian name Saint Nicola. And Santa Claus also got conflated with Kris Kringle, which in German means Christ the King. So now you can see how St. Nicholas, these depictions of him in art he's always kind of the skinny faced guy. He was a little guy, narrow, broken nose. How did we get from St. Nicholas to the Santa of our collective imagination? The jolly fellow in the fur-trimmed red velvet ensemble. Well, this brings us to upstate New York, the city of Troy to be exact, in the year 1823, when a truly magical poem, originally entitled A Visit from St. Nicholas, now known as The Night Before Christmas, was first published on December 23rd in the newspaper, the Troy Sentinel. And it's because of this poem that our image of Santa was born. Because in the poem, St. Nicholas is described as being chubby and plump, a right jolly old elf, and we know the rest by heart, with a round little belly that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly. But, the poem describes him as a little guy, an elf, with a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer. Now, we've forgotten the elf part, but we all know the names of the reindeers by heart. Rudolph came later, but we have on Dasher and Dancer and Prancer and Vixen, on Comet and Cupid, and Donner and Blitzen. Now, actually, Donner and Blitzen means thunder and lightning in Dutch. So how did Santa get big, and paternalistic, this Babbo Natale? And, well, it wasn't, the magical Zoltar machine. The Santa of our collective imagination was made visually iconic, none other than by the power of advertising, by a then fledgling company founded in Atlanta in 1886. And that would be the Coca-Cola Company, which during the Depression and during World War II created and appropriated the image of St. Nick as their celebrity spokesperson. And it was really great choice because they got a great deal. He waived all the residuals. And actually today, these vintage Coca-Cola ads are quite collectible and they go for a small fortune. Now, for one very important detail and fact, which was, I mentioned that St. Nicholas was a fourth century bishop. And that's key for another tradition. which is a symbol we associate with Christmas, is the candy cane. And the candy cane is in the shape of a bishop's crozier. So that's where the candy cane came from. So we can see that much of today's Christmas symbolism was born out of the legends of St. Nicholas and his generosity, then through the Middle Ages, celebrating the idea of his generosity, first on St. Nicholas Day, and then filtered through the Protestant Reformation, and then moving this tradition to Christmas Day. So now I want to get to the baby Jesus, since the holiday is celebrating his birth of the Savior, Christmas. Its roots refer to Christ and Mass, Messiah, so Christ the King, King of the Jews. Okay, so however, December 25th doesn't really jive with what astrologers and the star in the east would suggest. So they can go back in time to understand the movements of the heavens. And based on the descriptions that we have from the Gospels, it's much more likely that Jesus was born sometime in the spring. So how did we get to December 25th? Well, it just so happened that the ancient Romans celebrated a major festival around the winter solstice, the biggest and most festive festival of the entire year, and it was known as Saturnalia. And Saturnalia was just super important to the Romans because it marked the end of one agricultural cycle and the beginning of another. And the celebration was a multi-day affair, a week around the solstice, roughly December 17th to the 23rd, which was followed by another 2-day celebration in celebration of the sun god. And this was known as Sol Invictus, which means the unconquerable sun. So what a coincidence and a convergence. So there's a word for this kind of coincidence or conversion. It's known as syncretism, and it refers to the merging of different beliefs, customs, and traditions, which often happens during transitional periods in history. So Emperor Constantine was the first Christian emperor, and he made Christianity the religion of the empire, and that was in 312 AD. But the church fathers only first recognized Christ's date of birth as December 25th, 25 years after that, in 336 AD. Now, this choice of December 25th conveniently coincided with the celebrations of Saturnalia and specifically Sol Invictus. And this is interesting. This is a mosaic of Sol Invictus from a necropolis near St. Peter's. And you can see Sol Invictus, it almost is these rays of sun around his head. They're kind of like a halo. And we see this idea of superimposing the birth of Jesus, Son of God, with the major pagan holiday, return of the sun, and giving Christians something to celebrate at the same time, easing the transition from the pagan religion to the Christian religion. And this is an interesting little fresco from the catacombs in Rome, where you see the man on the left pointing to the sun and the virgin, and a very early virgin and the child. So they're keeping the celebrations at the same time. And there's also this kind of uncanny resemblance to things that we do. Okay, so the thing is, Saturn, this big daddy of a deity, he was father of the highest god in the Roman pantheon of gods, the equivalent of Kronos, god of time, of the Greek pantheon. And if you're familiar with astrology, Saturn is ruled by, Saturn rules Capricorn, and Capricorn, the cycle of sun cycle in Capricorn begins on December 21st. And again, it's the end. He's the god of agriculture and time, the end of one season and the beginning of another. So in Rome, you're in Rome during Saturnalia. Imagine the celebration of Christmas, New Year's, and Mardi Gras all rolled into one giant festival. Well, it's really something. And candles were a really big thing. The giving of candles to break the darkness and to recognize that light, as in the sun, would be returning soon. And candles would be lit throughout the ancient city of Rome. And Rome is really where this tradition was born, and one we very much alive today. And, so we can sometimes kind of get a little, carried away with all the colors and the inflatables. But in Italy, it's very much white light, these pin lights, very tasty. And so these are some pictures from Florence. And they also decorated with evergreens and holly. Pretty trippy, isn't it? And they also gave presents to children. These are some examples of Christmas presents. And then here was some like crazy stuff. Men would like wear these kind of little party hats, and there would be this role reversal. Kids would be in charge for the day, telling their parents what to do. Servants and masters flipped roles, and you would have the masters serving the servants. People would also run around naked in the streets. So it was really very, very, very bacchanalian. And just something I want to point out. So when they would banquet in Roman times, in antiquity, there were tables and chairs, and they would lie on these chaise lounges and eat, reclining. So this whole idea of like, someone giving you feeding you grapes while you're on the chaise lounge, that is actually how they ate dinner. So anyway, Saturnalia, feasting like crazy. It was really pretty crazy. So I want to talk a little bit now, going from this kind of like, very crazy bacchanalian thing to something a little bit more pious. And I want to talk a little bit about the Christmas story. Now, all of us have a general idea how that story unfolds, whether we're Christians or not. But most of us don't realize that the official Christmas story is actually the amalgamation of passages of only two of the Gospels, just two of the four Gospels, the first being the Gospel of Matthew. And the Gospel of Matthew begins with a rather tedious listing of the so-called ancestors of Jesus Christ. So it begins with so-and-so, begets so-and-so, begets so-and-so, essentially connecting Jesus all the way back to Abraham and Joseph, son of Jacob, husband of Mary, becoming the foster father of Jesus, since Mary is betrothed to Joseph. So Mary's promised to Joseph, but before they tie the knot, Joseph finds out that she is with child. And according to Matthew, Joseph decides he wants to cancel the contract, quietly have it annulled. But then Matthew tells us that an angel appears to Joseph in a dream and tells him, it's all good. The child was conceived of the Holy Spirit, and he should take Mary as his wife, kind of like an annunciation for Joseph. And this is how Joseph was convinced not to bail out on Mary, even though she's already with child before they're married. So then they get married, okay? And then Matthew tells us Jesus was born in the town of Bethlehem in Judea under the reign of King Herod. And then foreseeing the birth of Jesus, astrologers journeyed from the east, and they stopped off in Jerusalem to ask for directions. And they actually stopped and asked King Herod, so where is this child who's born to be the king of the Jews? Explaining that they had observed his star, and they were following his star and came a very long way to pay homage to him. So no surprise here, because Herod is pretty perturbed to learn about the birth of another king in the vicinity. because he's the king and a newborn king could pose a threat to his power. So he feels pretty paranoid, but he rather shrewdly tells the three magi that he doesn't know, but when they discover where the baby is, to please let him know, because he'd like to go pay homage too, which is pretty crafty because in reality, he's hoping to get a fix on the location of the newborn king so he could, you know what. Okay, so back to the Tre Magi, the three kings who follow the star and they find Jesus, and they arrive at the place where the baby's born. And Matthew doesn't, he tells us that Jesus was born in a house, and the Magi find the baby Jesus. And the Tre Magi, you know, we three kings of Orient are. Actually, the word Magi it's a plural of the Greek word magus, which means magician, but not in a Harry Potter sort of way. Magi refers to these being learned men and astrologers who could actually read from the position of the stars and to divine the future. So the important idea here is that important figures, wise men, journey from all corners of the earth, and they bow down to the ground in homage to the baby Jesus, each bringing a gift, three distinct gifts, which are gold, frankincense, and myrrh, and these again more gifts and gift giving. These are images from the Chapel of the Magi in Florence, the Medici Riccardi chapel, and this is the first king Gaspar, who's an Indian scholar, and of course his particular gift is gold, which is a material that we associate with royalty since Jesus is king of the Jews. And then the second king is Melchior. He's from Persia. His gift is frankincense, one which is associated with divinity. And the third wise man is Balthazar, who's a Babylonian scholar and king, and his gift is myrrh, a rare ointment used to anoint the dead before burial, foreshadowing that Jesus is predestined to die for all of us. So these three particular gifts, all extraordinarily expensive, were brought to the baby Jesus. So we're introduced to the three kings who are actually only mentioned in the Gospel of Matthew. So what's next? Okay, so we have another dream, okay? Matthew tells us that the three kings had a dream, kind of a collective dream, where they're told not to inform Herod of the newborn's location, so they go home a different way. And then sometime after this, Joseph has another dream that warns him that he better get the family out of Dodge to head for Egypt, get out of Bethlehem ASAP, okay, because Herod is going to search for your son and he could kill him. So this prompts the flight into Egypt, and Joseph takes the Holy Family to Egypt, where they remain until Herod's death. Now, by this time, Herod, who's been waiting and waiting and waiting for the astrologers to return, finally figures out they're not coming. So he resorts to ordering the massacre of all the children, not just the boys. And in the Gospel according to Matthew, it's children under the age of 2 in Bethlehem and the surrounding vicinity. So this is the infamous massacre of the innocents, and it's Herod's paranoid, crazed attempt to eliminate the potential threat of this newborn babe destined to be king of the Jews. So our story picks up after Herod dies, and an angel appears to Joseph in another dream and tells him it's safe to return home to Israel. And that's when the Holy Family, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, settle down in a town called Nazareth in the region of Galilee, and the rest, as they say, is history. So that's the end of Matthew's account of Christmas. Well, what about the second gospel, the one according to Mark? Well, with Mark, we have no account at all of the nativity of Jesus, the birth of Jesus, not in the Gospel of St. Mark. His gospel begins with the baptism of Jesus by St. John the Baptist, when the heavens open up with the Holy Spirit in the form of a dove descending upon Jesus with the words, thou art my beloved son, on thee my favor rests. So that's how Mark begins. No mention of the early life of Jesus. So the story of the three thieves, the massacre of the innocents, only comes from the Gospel of Matthew. So the Gospel of Luke largely corroborates Matthew, but he gives us some further information about Jesus's birth, and his gospel begins with Zacharias and Elizabeth, the parents of Saint John the Baptist. And Elizabeth finds out she's pregnant, even though she's 60 years old, she's miraculously pregnant. And then Mary receives a visit from the angel Gabriel, who tells her she's about to have a child. This is, of course, the Annunciation. And this is, we now find out how Mary conceived Jesus. And this has been a subject and an image that would be reproduced almost infinitely in Christian art. And here's where the famous dialogue took place. Ave Maria, Hail Mary, gratia plena, full of grace, Dominus tectum, the Lord is with thee. The Virgin Mary is like in shock, right? She's not able to process. She's about to have a child because she's still a virgin. And Gabriel tells her, to allay her fears and console her. Do not be afraid, for God has been gracious to you, and you shall conceive and bear a son, and you shall give him the name Jesus. And then Mary responds, thy will be done. Then Mary goes to share the good news with her cousin Elizabeth. And this is when she discovers Elizabeth is pregnant with John the Baptist. And Elizabeth greets, when Elizabeth greets Mary, she does so with the words also immortalized in the prayer of the Hail Mary. Elizabeth says, blessed is the fruit of thy womb, referring, of course, to Jesus in Mary's womb. So this really kicks the whole thing off and gives us some important elements that we only get from Luke. So Luke also fills in some other gaps left by Matthew. He tells us there was a decree by the Emperor Augustus for a census that was taken through the entire Roman world, which is why Mary and Joseph are headed to Bethlehem, the city of David. Historically, there probably wasn't a census, and if there had been, it would not likely have been in December. But it's important to get them to Bethlehem, the city of David, in order to fulfill the prophecy that the Messiah would be born of the lineage of David. So that gets them to Bethlehem, and Mary gives birth to Jesus and wraps him in swaddling clothes. And then, the song, away in a manger, there's no room in the inn. And we get the manger from Luke. Luke tells us Christ was born in a manger, and the word is mangiatorio in Italian, which means a mangiatorio is a stall in a barn and a place where the animals mangiare. So it's kind of interesting, that word for mangia, right? And then an angel appears to the shepherds and announces glory to God in the highest and peace to his people on earth. And so the local shepherds hastily make way to the manger to behold the newborn king. And so the Gospel of Matthew gives us the grandness and pageantry of the Magi who journey a long way, whereas with Luke, it's much more humble, it's rustic, it's an intimate nativity in a barn, and we just have local shepherds who have come to adore the baby Jesus. And that essentially ends with what, the nativity story. The next episode of Luke is 8 days later. This is the Feast of the Circumcision, because Jesus, of course, is Jewish. He's brought to the temple and he's named Jesus as Gabriel had instructed Mary. Now everything prescribed by the law is fulfilled, and they return to Nazareth and Galilee. And with Luke, there's no mention of Herod, no mention of the massacre of the innocents, just the fulfillment of the Judaic tradition and law. And they return to Nazareth, where Jesus, and I'm quoting here, quote, grew up to be big and strong and a wise man, and God's favor was clearly upon him. So in case you're thinking, what about the gospel according to John? Did John say anything about the baby Jesus? Well, actually, not at all. The Gospel of John is unique among the Gospels. It's very abstract. Actually, it begins with, in the beginning, there was the Word, and the Word was God. So nothing about Jesus's infancy or childhood. So every year when I put out my little nativity set from when I was a child, I think about how we've pieced together this extraordinary dramatic story of the Holy Family making their way to Bethlehem, and how we have all these different characters, our figurines, who have been piecemealed together from different biblical sources. Now, with this as background, I want to talk a little bit about the tradition of the Christmas creche itself, the cribs, the major scenes that are so ubiquitous during the holidays. And when I was growing up, we would always wait to add the baby Jesus until after we got back from midnight mass. But our collective tradition of the creche began 800 years ago, thanks to Saint Francis of Assisi. And it began with a live reenactment of the Christmas story staged on Christmas Eve in a tiny Tuscan town called Greccio, where St. Francis was living. Now, no saint is more closely associated with simplicity and the beauty of the natural world. St. Francis, preached to the animals. He preached to the birds. He was also a great reformer and a man of the people, founded the Franciscan order. And he was very anti-materialism. He's probably turning in his grave. But anyway, his motivation for staging this first reenactment of the nativity story was a means to get ordinary people engaged emotionally with the miracle of the first Christmas, and to help them regain a sense of a renewed sense of wonder and joy about it. And up until Francis's first live creche, Christmas meant going to church. Priests would tell the Christmas story, but in Latin, which ordinary folks couldn't understand. So it was really no different than an ordinary, Sunday at church. So St. Francis decided he wanted to make this the extraordinary experience of the first Christmas accessible to ordinary people by literally bringing it to life for the people. And he sought the Pope's permission to do this, which he received. And he asked a friend to loan him some animals and some straw so he could set up a manger scene and to represent Jesus's birth in Bethlehem. And he set this up in a cave, rocky like Jerusalem, just outside of town. And it featured a wax figure of the baby Jesus and live donkey and ox, which his friend loaned him. And local shepherds were watching over their sheep in nearby fields, just as shepherds had, according to Luke, in Bethlehem on that very first Christmas Eve a long, long time ago, when the sky suddenly filled with angels announcing Christ's birth. So during Mass, St. Francis told the Christmas story, and he told it based on that simple version from the Gospel of Luke. And he delivered a sermon in the local dialect. In his biography of St. Francis, St. Bonaventure described what happened that night. And I'm quoting, "The brethren were summoned, and the forest resounded with their voices, and the night was made glorious by many brilliant stars, and the sonorous psalms of praise. St. Francis stood before the manger, full of devotion and piety, bathed in tears and radiant with joy. And then he preached to the people around the nativity of the baby Jesus. And being unable to utter his name for the tenderness of his love, he called him the Babe of Bethlehem." So this first nativity reenactment proved so popular that towns in other areas soon began to set up living nativities to celebrate Christmas. And now Christians everywhere celebrate with live nativity plays, setting up scenes, and then with statues in town squares, churches, and homes. And I can remember as a child the excitement when my cousin Mark was going to be a drummer boy. Now, of course, today we feature a much larger cast of characters than St. Francis featured in his original. We have drummer boys and shepherds and angels, the magi, a menagerie of animals, and even more, as we will see, which will bring me to Napoli. But before I go there, 2 Christmases ago, Pope Francis made his way to that little chapel in the cave outside of Vecchio, where you can visit today. So now I want to go back to Naples and via San Gregorio Armeno in Naples' old city center, where it's Christmas all year long. And there are these amazing artisan workshops that are busily working on creche figurines, and these amazing stores. You'll see many of them displaying proudly their "not made in China" signs. And this is known as Christmas Alley. And this is really because Naples is the Presepio, the creche capital of the world, and it's been so for the past 300 years. During the 1700s, creche figures were an obsession in Naples with the noble and wealthy families. And these families would compete to create the most impressive creches. And when Charles III of Spain ruled Naples and Sicily from 1734 to 69, he owned a creche with nearly 6,000 figures. So here are some, you can take a closer look at some of these figurines here. And these in particular have finely painted terracotta heads with arms and legs carved from wood, bodies shaped with hemp and wire. And then you'll have these glorious Baroque angels made of paper mache. And then you'll also notice like a chef with a pot of spaghetti, a fruit vendor, and these figures that have seemingly nothing to do with the nativity story. And they're very typical of Neapolitan style creche or presepio. And they are totally in the spirit of St. Francis because they're featuring colorful local peasants going about their quotidian tasks. And these secular figures are known as the pastori, which are really my favorite. And there's just an endless variety of the pastori, whereas the traditional nativity figurines, Mary, Joseph, the wise men, are technically the presepi. Now, this isn't Charles III's here. Well, there's more of those. But anyway, this is a creche that's pretty spectacular. There's a museum at the very high point in Naples in the convent of San Martino. This is on permanent display. They have all these amazing creches. It's not, Charles, there's maybe 1,000 figures here. So you can imagine, what 6,000 would look like. This is the sausage shop with the Pastori neighborhood. Look at those links of sausage, even the little dogs. And then here's another presepio you can see in Naples in the church of Santa Chiara. You'll also notice maybe a non sequitur is like these Roman ruins, which are very typical too. And the reason for this is that it was under the reign of Charles III. He funded the exciting excavations that were going on in Pompeii. And so these discoveries were a big deal, and they became part of, the scenery of the Presepi. And this is the tree, the Baroque angel tree, and with the Neapolitan creche with 200 figures at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. If you're going to be in New York, this is up until the Epiphany, which is the 12th day of Christmas. And the Epiphany, of course, marks the arrival of the 3 wise men bringing their gifts for the king. And of course, the Epiphany is a very big day in the Eastern Church. And Epiphany means manifestation, as in the revealing that Christ is the Messiah. And this is through the arrival of the Magi the proof of this. And so in Florence, they like to do these reenactments. So they have a reenactment of the arrival of the Magi that arrive in the Duomo with their gifts. The Epiphany also marks the arrival of the Befana, the Christmas witch. So this is a uniquely Italian twist, bringing sweets for little boys and girls. And if they're bad, they get coal. And the name Befana comes from Epiphany. And just consider this, that up until recently, maybe the past 50 years, gifts were never really a big deal at Christmas, and gifts were associated with the Epiphany. And you would put little sweets in the shoes of children, and it was always something edible. And our notion of Santa Claus is really more, you know, a Northern European custom that was exported to the New World in North America. And now, of course, with globalization, it's pretty much the entire Christian world celebrates the spirit of gifts on December 25th. And to conclude, a few words about New Year's Eve and New Year's. I haven't really spoken about foods and all their local variations and traditions. So on New Year's Eve, it's traditional that you should eat sausages for the richness of life, accompanied by lentils for wealth and good fortune. And you should eat grapes for husbandry and moderation, you know, savor one grape at a time, you know, portion control, right? And of course, regions have their specialties like strufoli in the South, but panettone is something that pretty much throughout the peninsula, people have panettone at Christmas. And I remember my grandmother, she used to make panettone French toast. And when I had my restaurant, we would do that. And then there's this crazy tradition in Naples, which is tossing plates out the window and also playing tombola, kind of like bingo. So you do this on New Year's Eve, out with the old, in with the new. And when I had my restaurant, I love this Neapolitan plate tossing thing. I've never been to Naples to see this, and I'd really like wonder what that's like and if it's dangerous or what. But at my restaurant, I got a window frame every year, and I would put it up on the bar and open up the window, and I had paper plates, and people would write, you know, what they wanted to get rid of, you know, kind of, it wasn't really a New Year's resolution, but, you know, this is the thing I want to be rid of, out with the old and in with the new. And we had Neapolitan plate tossing on New Year's Eve. It became so popular, I did it for like 4 days leading up until New Year's. And then, of course, this tradition of wearing red underwear. Whatever you do, do not forget to wear red underwear on New Year's for luck, love, and passion in the upcoming year. And at the stroke of midnight, there are fireworks everywhere. And so I want to wish you all Buon Natale, Buon Compleanno, e Saturnalia. And I just want to finish my remarks with a really interesting cover. When I was researching this was a cover of Life magazine, and it's dated Christmas Eve of 1945. And this would be the first Christmas after the war. And I think this really speaks so strongly to the deep bonds between Italy and the United States. This is an image from the Chapel of the Magi that I showed you earlier, and especially these connections and all the Italian Americans who so bravely and proudly defended their country during the war. And just one other note about the art that you saw here. There's kind of follow-up details that will be sent to all of you with where all the art is located, who painted it, and so on, for those details in case you were wondering. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions that you might have. Do we have any questions?
Thanks so much, Carla. That was great. If you have questions, could you please type them into the chat box and then I will relay them to Carla. Carla, we did have a few so far. So Saint Nicholas, who is he actually the patron saint of? Is it children? Is it brides? Is it sailors? He seems to be a pretty multifaceted character.
Okay, so generally, so saints are generally patron of a number of things. So he's patron saint of children. There's a story about little boys too, 3 little boys, 3 little girls. He's also the patron saint of sailors. And whoever wrote that question, yeah, the sailor thing. And I mentioned that the Venetians were interested in his bones too. And that's because, of course, they're sailors and they wanted his bones because that's important. And I really this is kind of a little bit off the subject, but there's a church of St. Nicholas on the Lido. And they, in fact, the Barres took the bones of St. Nicholas, but they left a few bones behind. And the Venetians got there late. And so they picked up what was left over. And, they've done this DNA matching with the bones. And it is the same saint. So there's a cathedral dedicated to St. Nicholas in Venice as well. And so he's not only patron saint of children, but also patron saint of sailors.
Great, thank you. And you talked about the Prosepi, which are just beautiful. And in fact, I'm actually headed to New York on Friday, so I look forward to going to the Met and seeing it. But what about Christmas trees? St. Nicholas Day is the 6th, so that's an important holiday. You have the 24th, the Bagila, you have Christmas Day, you have the Epiphany. When do Italians put up their Christmas trees? Is it
okay? So Christmas tree is really northern. It's definitely northern tradition. And a really interesting thing about Christmas tree, it was the first time that they put a Christmas tree up in that in the square in the Vatican was 1982. So Christmas tree is entirely new. It's a northern tradition, very much of the north, and solstice from the Lapland countries and so on. But so the Christmas tree is a new thing in Italy, and so it was the first. And they have beautiful trees in Florence, and they have like a floating tree in Venice. So, but it's new, and that really is a northern tradition that now has become a global tradition.
Okay. So we have another tradition here. I mean, generally in the U.S., and it's been debatable. These 7 fishes. Is this an Italian American concept? Is this an Italian concept? And or maybe did it come from someplace else in Southern Europe?
This is a marketing concept. So it's really interesting. If you do a Google search on the 7 fishes, it first comes up in print. It was a special menu. I'm from Philadelphia. There was a Christmas Eve menu. It was a marketing idea for a Christmas Eve menu in a restaurant in Philadelphia, the Feast of the 7 Fishes. And this was, I'm going to get the date wrong, but around like in the 1980s. So it's a restaurant in Philly. The restaurant is still in operation. But the tradition, of course, of having fish on Christmas Eve is an Italian tradition, to eat light before a feast day, and fish, no meat, kind of a sacrifice because of the feast coming. And very traditional to have codfish, bacala. And I can remember being just horrified by that. My father loved his bacala. And so, people will say, what are the 7 fishes? What's the significance of 7? Is it the sacraments and so on? And so I don't want to like burst any bubbles here, but it is it's a marketing thing, but fish is traditional. So, yeah. Any other questions?
Great, thank you. I think we might have one here in the chat. Hold on one second. Do Italians use juniper bushes for trees? and in terms of decorations, what would you typically find on a tree? Would they be edible, with like fruits or candies or nuts?
So again, the trees are new. So it's not really a tradition. It's whatever is happening, right now. But the really interesting thing to me about Italian, the food element. I mean, again, the giving of gifts was always food, clementines, to give an orange, chestnuts, those kinds of things, and sweet treats, because sweets were scarce and expensive, and so those elements. But as far as other decorations, and they do use evergreens. There's one other thing I just wanted to mention. I ended up in this sort of strange rabbit hole conversation with someone who was, we're talking about the Immaculate Conception, which is on the 8th of December. And they were a little confused about what that was. And that isn't the Annunciation. So Mary was actually pregnant for 9 months. It was like a normal, gestation. And the Feast of the Immaculate Conception was actually, the Immaculate Conception was Mary's. Mary was conceived without sin, and the Feast of the Immaculate Conception was when the church recognized this idea that Mary was conceived without sin. So it has nothing to do, because I always remember as a child being like, oh, we have to go to church. It's the Immaculate Conception. And I'm like, wow, she had a baby in 3 weeks or less. That seemed crazy. But just in case anyone has that, and you've always been wondering about that. So that's the story with the Annunciation is different from the Immaculate Conception. So.
Great.
And
Thank you.
There's my book. Also, I've created a mug, Summa Cum Laude mug, and you can get it at this wonderful ceramica store in San Francisco, Biordi. It's hand painted in Daruta. So I hope you'll consider my book for friends for the holiday. All Italophiles must read it. It's a little mini encyclopedia of fun facts. So there's an essay in there called "You've Come a Long Way, Santa," for example. So anyway, but lots of fun things. There are about 200 of these mini essays. But anyway, so I hope you all enjoyed it. And also, if you think of any other further questions in the materials I sent with the backup information. Oh, we have Kathleen. Do you have a question or a waving? Can Kathleen unmute herself?
Right. Well, I'm wondering how this tradition of wearing red underwear got going.
Oh, I'm not really sure about that. I have no idea, but it is a uniquely Italian, and actually I've searched. I wish I had a good answer for you on that, but it's really amazing. And I've been to Italy, in the lead up to Christmas, and these lingerie stores are like these red. It's a big deal. And actually they do it in Spain. It's something that they do throughout Europe. It's not strictly Italy. It started in Italy, that much I know. But, you go to Spain and the lingerie stores are filled with red underwear too. And same like in the UK and so on. So this is like a pan-European tradition, so.
Is it a male and female both wear the red underwear?
Oh, yes.
And just adults, or the children wear red underwear too?
Everybody, and it's so funny. I mean, I had trouble finding it. I take a lot of these pictures myself, and there's a David, in his red underwear that I have from this, lingerie shop, so that that's definitely men, women, children. It's for everybody. So, yeah.
Well, thank you everyone for your questions. Thank you, Carla, for a fabulous lecture. I know we all learned a lot. And we look forward to having you present again for us. For those of you that are not members of NOIAW, we definitely encourage you to join. We do fantastic programming like you've just attended now. We'd love to see you back at our upcoming events. In fact, our next one will be next month, will be our Wise Women, where we honor across all of the chapters that NOIAW has, the accomplishments of Italian American women in honor of the Epiphany. And we hope to see you at that event. You can register for that on our website. And so I wish you all a Buon Natale and a Felice Anno. And thank you again to Carla. Have a wonderful evening. And I look forward to seeing you all again.
Ciao, ciao.
Buonanotte.
Arrivederci.